Hi there. I'm Ezra from Summerhill.
And I'm Michael from Summerhill.
And we're in our Grüner Veltliner block at Summerhill Vineyard in Kelowna, British Columbia on a day in late August, getting ready for harvest.
We are. It's only a few days away now.
And we wanted to do a little retrospective on the last few years of this block of grapes. The 2020 vintage is just in veraison, getting riper, starting to develop flavor and soften.
Still a little tart.
And crunchy seeds.
might need a little more time.
But these ones are ready to drink. So we have the 2019 vintage last year, 2018 vintage, and the 2017 vintage. And we're going to taste them all and see how this wine develops and talk about the way we make it, the way we turn these grapes into wine.
Absolutely.
So where do you want to start? You want to start fresh or you want to start old?
Let's start old.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll start with the 2017.
Thank you. So now all of these wines are certified by Demeter as Biodynamic Wine. And what does that mean, Michael?
It means that we grow the grapes with the biodynamic preps. So we do a lot of work out in the vineyard to work with our soil, work with our cover crop, work with our canopy and with our grapes. And then when we bring the fruit in, we don't add any yeast, we don't add any nutrients. We do fine with a little bit of bentonite and add a little bit of sulfur before bottling. But other than that, we just let Mother Nature do the rest.
Right.
And if we get it right out in the vineyard, in this block, it means that we're going to get it right in the cellar.
Right, well said. So yeah, so our goal is to make the most pure, authentic wine, and these are well-made wine. These aren't sort of funky natural wines, but these are pure, authentic, naturally made wines. Well, and Grüner is such an amazing grape, hey? It has like a richness and a savory quality to it, doesn't it?
It does, and it's got that characteristic white pepper, which I'm sure we'll taste across the board, vintage to vintage.
Yeah, and there's something like herbal about it. I always think of celery leaf, but in this case, it has an earthiness that almost reminds me of celery root. Have you ever had celeriac, like a celery plant that's been bred for its root?
Yeah, that describes it really well.
Yeah. Now, how was this wine made? Like, of course, we talked about no yeast and no nutrients, but what was sort of the protocol for winemaking?
Yeah, so with this wine, we packed half of the block. We destemmed it, we put it into the press, we pressed it off, let it settle for about 12 hours, and then transferred it to another tank where it did its fermentation. The other half of the block we picked, we destemmed, we put into small containers, and we actually fermented it on the skin. So every day we would come in, punch the skins down into the juice, and let it ferment that way, and then at the end we blended the two together.
You can feel it on your tongue, eh?
Yeah, it's got a little bit of tannin, a little bit of structure. That richness comes through from the skin contact for sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the wine naturally has like a lightness, like a real purity, almost like I think of like drinking mountain stream water, that sense of purity you get from it, but then it has like a weight to it.
Yeah, it's quite heavy on the palate. It's got a richness and a roundness and a beautiful mouthfeel to it. It really is a weighty, almost oily wine, which is quite nice.
It's beautiful, and it's very dry.
Yes, yep. It fermented dry.
Yeah.
And went through malolactic fermentation.
Yeah, malolactic fermentation. So that is, for the viewers at home, the malic acid, like you would find in an apple, that bright, crisp acidity, gets transformed into
Lactic
acid, like you get in milk, which you don't even think of as being acidic. It has a much softer character to it.
Yeah, and it really helps round it out and give it that mouthfeel. So.
Well, that's lovely, and it's now a couple years old, and it's holding up really well. You can tell it's a wine with a lot of integrity, and I'd say it drinks like amazing right now. I've followed this wine since it was young. It's never been better than it is now, and I'm sure it will be wonderful for years to come, but it's good. Like, now is a prime time to drink it, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's showing beautifully,
Yeah.
and pulling the corks now is a great idea. I've started drinking my cellar.
Fantastic. So let's move to pour a little libation for Bacchus, although, of course, I'm Jewish. but that's okay. This is now the 2018 vintage, and the winemaking protocol was the same.
It was, yeah.
And the vintage, was the vintage much different between 17 and 18?
It was a little bit different. In 17,
smells different.
we had a little bit more smoke from the forest fires, and so we kind of lagged behind a little bit. We're at 18. It was a great growing season. The fruit got nice and ripe. We had really cool nights, and it got really cool during harvest, and so it really helped preserve a lot of the acidity. I think that shows. You get a lot more apricot to it. You still get those celery notes and white pepper, but I find there's a lot more almost stone fruit and tropical fruits that come through.
Well, I still wouldn't call this like a fruity wine. I would still call this more like a dry, savory wine. I'd say like the white pepper, the herbal quality. But you're right, there's a certain richness to it that is more like a stone fruit kind of richness, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's the same vineyard, same winemaking style, but you know, and there's similar notes like that herbal note and that white pepper, but they are quite different. And what's great about the biodynamic wines is that they really show vintage. You know, what's going to grow in your vineyard, what's going to come into the cellar is truly reflective of what the year looked like.
It's interesting also because you can be, I mean, this is made partially like a red wine, and it has that sort of feeling of astringency on the finish, like a red wine, and this one's a year younger. I don't know if it's the vintage or just that it's younger, but that's like a little bit more pronounced in this one versus the older one. The older one is a little softer.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think in a year this one will soften quite a bit, but the year we just got more of that structure, and that comes through in the wine.
Yeah. I kind of like it actually. It's kind of nice because it's like it's a little zingier too. The acidity is a little bit more zingier, and you have the astringency. So there's a little bit like, whereas the first one was like really soft and had that sort of stream water lightness on the finish and the weight. This one's got more aliveness and sort of vitality, and a little more zing, a little more astringency, like plays in your mouth, a little bit more, like louder, if you can understand what I mean by
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I think that describes it really well.
Well, it's nice to get to know this wine a little bit because this one has just been aging in our cellar. We haven't really been sharing it or drinking it or wine pairing it, so this is nice for me to get to know it a little bit.
Yeah, it's nice to
now,
revisit
too.
it and see how it's doing. Absolutely.
All right, and let's move on to 2019.
2019.
Now this year I know that you completely changed the winemaking protocol. We changed our branding. We changed everything about this wine, even the bottle that it's bottled in is a more traditional for this grape variety. This is you'd buy normally a Grüner Veltliner in this kind of bottle rather than this one. But what in the winemaking did you do differently here?
So instead of doing a skin contact with this one, we picked the block. We destemmed it, we pressed it. We controlled the temperature a little bit more during fermentation to prevent the malolactic fermentation from happening, as well as to just get a little bit smoother of a fermentation. And as a result, we got a little bit more residual sugar. So it's a little bit brighter acid, a little bit more sugar. So it has balance like the other ones does. It just presents a little bit differently.
So I'm still on the nose. I haven't tasted it yet, but it's amazing. Like the character of this wine is so distinctive, and really has translated through. Like, despite that you made it differently, the whole protocol was different. Those notes. Now this is really like that real beautiful celery leaf. Like not root. It doesn't have the earthiness of the 17. It's more fresher.
Yeah,
more,
absolutely.
But that white pepper and celery leaf was so beautiful, and maybe like more like a star fruit. You know what I mean? Like kind of white, fresh, crisp kind of fruit character, like from like a star fruit.
Yeah, it's a little bit fruitier. It's almost like the 17 and the 19 blend to make the 18, which is kind of neat. But it does show that character of the vineyard and of the varietal. Like you can tell they're siblings for sure.
Yeah. So this is now actually like you said, it has a little residual sugar.
Yes.
And that carries some of the more fruitier characters of it. So this is less a savory wine. It has savory notes in it because it's Grüner, but it also has a more obviously fruity character.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it doesn't have the malolactic fermentation, so it's crisper, like more like an aromatic wine almost.
Yeah, it's a little bit crisper, a little bit more aromatic.
And would you still say this is a dry wine or just barely off dry, really?
I would say barely off dry.
Yeah.
You do notice the residual sugar a little bit, but
But nobody would say like, oh, that's sweet.
no, not at all.
No.
No, it's definitely not sweet. So
Yeah.
if I had to classify it, I'd say slightly off dry, but leaning towards dry.
And it still has that beautiful body. I love the way this grape feels in the mouth. That's one of my favorite things. And Grüner Veltliner is mostly grown in Austria. This is a much hotter site than where you typically grow. And so the character of it is quite intense. Like you really taste Grüner, and you get a beautiful mouthfeel from the ripeness of these grapes. It's something I really like about this wine. All three of the wines.
Absolutely. This really is a perfect site for it. It grows so beautifully here. The wines that come out are stunning. We might have to plant a few more acres soon.
It's good.